How lack of communication can sneakily ruin your relationships, and how can we fix it? The first question I ask couples when they come in to meet me is this: what brings you in today? And the response is almost always something like, we have communication issues, Dr. Jack. If I stopped there, I wouldn't learn much about what's going on for them, because communication issues is different for everyone. Even more challenging is that fact that within any relationship, couples will mean different things for what they describe as communication issues. Each of us interprets and understands things or concepts differently. Why a relationship cannot work without communication? We are constantly communicating with each other, with all different types of people. Whether we believe it or not, literal words aside, we unconsciously communicate through nonverbals like facial expressions and body language, which I tell my clients often is between 60 and 90% of how we communicate. Experts tell us between 60 and 90% communication is done non-verbally. That's called micro-communication skills. And we have to pay careful attention to that. So when my students or clients go on dates, I tell them, make sure you sit straight. You don't sit in a cross position with your arms folded, because that's a sign of conflict. You have steady eye contact with the person that's opposite the table. You smile a lot. There's a lot that goes on in nonverbal communication, and I'll get into that in a little bit. What's important to realize are subtle things like the tone of our voice and how we communicate through our behavior. Couples that don't learn to consciously communicate will face issues when it comes to intimacy, conflict, and relationship growth. Understanding your partner's inner world and having them understand yours is pivotal to having a great connection with your partner. If you struggle to communicate in a way that helps your relationship to get bigger and evolve, then over time you'll find that unfortunately you will grow apart. Lack of communication in relationships can't be ignored, especially in situations when you actively feel like you can't communicate with your partner. What are the effects of lack of communication in a relationship? So let's review that. If there's poor communication, we will see escalated conflict. That's number one. If there's poor communication, there will be negative perspective of your partner. You won't see them in a positive light. If there's poor communication, they'll be turning away from each other's attempts to connect. As a result, it starts to wither and the relationship just fragments and fractures. If there's poor communication, there's feeling unseen or unknown. There's loneliness. When there's poor communication, there's a lack of intimacy. When there's poor communication, there's difficult setting and reaching of goals. What are the signs of bad communication in a dating relationship or a marriage? Number one, criticizing or belittling each other is a reflection of bad communication. Getting defensive is a symptom or a sign of bad communication. Stonewalling, which is giving the cold shoulder to your wife or to your dating partner, is another sign of bad communication. Passive aggressive behavior, another one. Assuming you know what your partner is thinking when you're not communicating effectively. Another one is cyclical arguments that are never resolved when there's bad communication. Another sign of bad communication, lack of compromise. If you had good communication, you'd negotiate fairly and appropriately and effectively. But because you don't have good communication, there's lack of compromise. No side wants to give in. Another sign of bad communication, fewer attempts to connect with each other. You just don't even bother trying. Another sign of bad communication, arguing about the facts behind the conflict instead of focusing on what the experience was like for each person. How do we fix communication problems in relationships? Well, look at your and your partner's attachment styles. In psychology, attachment theory holds that each of us has a style of doing relationships, and that's shaped by the type of care that we received from our earliest caregivers, that being our parents. If one or both people have an insecure attachment style in a relationship, that means the boy or the girl, or the husband and the wife, that means they tend to form insecure attachments with others instead of steady and secure ones, then communication will be driven by anxiety rather than authenticity, where any of the parties in the relationship was raised in a home where there was insecurity. Look out for radical behavior. Insecure attachment is when a person responds to their own needs for connection by doing something desperate, such as either avoiding attachment or desperately pursuing someone else, anxious attachment. In either case, it's important to learn about what will make it feel safe enough to engage in communication in a real way rather than be measures of self-protection. If you have a partner with an avoidance style, they'll typically have a need for space. You can respond to this by asking to communicate in small chunks. Don't overwhelm them. Give them time to think or offer them some of the conversation via text or email, but don't overwhelm the partner. If you have a partner with an anxious style, it's important to communicate to them in a way that's predictable and actively reassuring of their feelings, otherwise they become very tense and anxious. I'll give you an example about anxious individuals. There was a great story that I once heard from Rebbetzin Kanievsky, Reb Chaim Kanievsky's wife, Rebbetzin Batsheva, who passed away, Aleha Shalom, that she had an older woman living next to her who was a Holocaust survivor, who had nightmares every night that people were going to come throw her out of her apartment. And she would knock on the door of Rebbetzin Kanievsky's door every day, hysterical, I'm going to be thrown out, they're going to take me away. And she would calm her down, she would say, Zelo halach, zelo haya velo yihye. This has not happened, this will never happen. So that's how you have to deal with someone anxious. You yourself have to be grounded, and you have to be, have a good, strong balance. Address past hurts that haven't been resolved. That's so important. Another reason you might be struggling to communicate is because something painful happened in your relationship that hasn't been fully resolved. Perhaps there was a betrayal, or someone said something that's never properly been amended, and as a result, you still have an axe to grind against your partner. To move forward and to begin communicating better, you'll need to process these hurts, rebuild trust, and be willing to forgive each other. If your partner isn't communicating with you, it's helpful to identify the why. Why is your partner not communicating with you? Is it something left over from childhood? Are they feeling hurt by you? Did they just have a different idea of what it means to communicate? Try to bring these questions up with them and explore what you both need when it comes to open and honest communication. You'll likely find that you both have different answers.